Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we are recording today, the Wurundjeri Wurrung people and the Bunurong people of the Eastern and Greater Kulin Nation. We pay our deepest respect to their elders, past and present. We also expand that respect to all First Nations peoples, and we honour their sovereignty was never ceded. We acknowledge their enduring and unbroken connection, their storytelling, and their connection to land, waterway, sky, culture, and communities. And country, of course. We stand with them in their ongoing calls for truth-telling, treaty, sovereignty, justice, land rights, and reconciliation. This was, and always will be, Aboriginal land. Before we begin, quick heads up. Today's episode touches on colonial expansion, dispossession of First Nations peoples, and some harsh realities of early road buildings and construction and settlements. If this is not the right time for you, please feel free to skip, pause, or watch one of our lighter episodes. Your well-being always comes first. And as always, if you do choose to listen or watch, please, as always, listen with care. Before the Hume Highway, before the Northeast rail line ever came into being, even before the telegraph poles stitched the colonies together, there was a road. The road that carved dreams, drays, and dust all the way from Naarm-Melbourne to Gadigal-Country, Sydney. Today, we're taking a journey along what is left of this track, the old Sydney Road, starting in the heart of Naarm-Melbourne, CBD, and then winding its way through history, right up to the edges of what we now know as the township of Kilmore. Welcome to Down the Yarra, the podcast that takes you on a deep dive into the heart and soul of Naarm-Melbourne and South Central Victoria. Whether you're a local or just curious, this podcast is for you. I'm your host, as always, Andy. Welcome. We start our journey just outside the Queen Victoria Market on Elizabeth Street in Melbourne, Melbourne CBD. But roll the clock back to the 1840s. This wasn't a market back then. Oh no, it was far from it. It was a burial ground. It's muddy track and the muddy track north. Before the neat tramlines and bustling deli bells that you have now. This was a staging point for bullocks teams heading out of Melbourne. Here is where the road was rustled. The air was full of smells of horse sweat and wet leather. And also the pace was much slower. Maybe 20 kilometres in a day, if you were lucky to do so. Elizabeth Street itself was notorious for flooding in heavy rains in the early days. It actually is a natural watercourse. So you'll probably imagine trying to get heavily laden wagon flowing through the thick, sticky clay. Those making the journey to Sydney knew hard work started right here. The first landmark heading north is what we now know as Haymarket Roundabout of Death, which we covered in a previous episode, where today's Elizabeth Street meets Flemington Road. Back then, this was a crossroads of stock and supplies, a place where drovers and traders peeled off towards the cattle yards in Newmarket, or passed on towards the goldfields and beyond. From here, the road went past what we now call Flemington, settlement known for its fertile river flats and the occasional race meetings. Name of Old Sydney Road might sound grand and glamorous today, but back then in the 1850s it was little more than a dusty, corrugated ribbon of dirt, winding towards the paddocks and the Maribyrnong river bends further west. Next stop, you'd climb towards Mount Alexander Road. Namesake here was taken from the goldfield near the centre of Castlemaine, in between Castlemaine and Bendigo, more to the point. Place this road was critical for reaching gold boom in the 1850s. Every dray heading north for the diggings would have pondered along here. Hoof beat and wheel rut slowly carving its way deeper into the land. Turning off to the right of Mount Alexander Road into Pascoe Vale Road at what is now Mooney Ponds Junction, but then a patch of small towns, sheep paddocks and the occasional roadhouse. Roadhouses were essential back then. You could water your horse, grab a hot meal, and swap news with other travellers in the process. But this was also bushranger territory. Dense scrub along the parts of this part of the route gave cover to those looking to relieve travellers of their gold, stock and supplies. Heading further north, we hit Somerton and Mickleham. These were tiny settlements back then, and still are, well, relatively, but also strategically important. By the 1850s, coach services like that of Cobb & Co. were running up Old Sydney Road, changing horses every 15 to 20 kilometres. Mickleham, what was a vital change over point. Its roadhouse inns were bustling with activity, often through the night. The road here began to show first hints of rolling terrain that they'd face further north, with dips, rises and broad views across the grasslands. The First Nations people, these grasslands were hunting and gathering grounds for countless generations, but yet, at the same time, the road carved through them like a deep scar, opening the land to settlers and pushing Indigenous communities further from their country. North of Mickleham, road slipped through the back blocks of Wallan. By the mid-19th century, this was a coach town, with businesses like blacksmith, stables, and the occasional rowdy public house. The road began to curve around the notorious rise, what is now Pretty Sally Hill. Name sounds sweet, but I assure you that it's not. But this was a rough climb for bullock teams and dangerous descent in wet weather. There were a few theories about the name. Some say Sally was the local innkeeper's wife, known for her charm. Another theory supports that she was a bushranger's hideout, named, ironically, as Pretty Sally's Hell. The view from the top was a reward in itself. Rolling hills, Great Divide Range in the distance, and the thin line of road leading further north towards Kilmore. Just south of Kilmore, on Old Sydney Road merges with what is now the Northern Highway, the Old Hume. From here, drays could push on towards Seymour, Albury, Yass, and eventually on to Sydney. In its heyday, this was one of the most important overland routes in Australia. Passengers wood and freight towards two growing centres was most important. Today, much of the old route lies bypassed by the new road. And you can still hear the ghost of the journey that once was. The Old Sydney Road isn't just a road. Oh no, it's far from it. It's a time capsule in itself. If you know where to look, of course. Still see the original alignments of the road from old mile markers and in crumbling stone walls that lined it. Driving it today, you can almost hear the crack of harness leather, crack of the whip, and the murmur of travellers swapping stories under the southern stars. Next time I'm down the Yarra, we'll head back to where it all began, this journey, Queen Victoria Market. But looking at something far more controversial, just not then fresh produce, than the fresh produce of the market. We're talking about the repeated vandalism of John Batman's monument, various debates that it sparked, and what it says about in reckoning with our colonial past. Well, that's coming up soon. You won't want to miss it. As always, please like, share and subscribe to the channel. And if you're enjoying the season, please tell us if you have any memories of travelling the Old Sydney Road. Good or bad, of course. Would love to hear from you. If you want to hear more, please go to Podbean and hit follow and check out our socials. I'm your host, Andy, and I'll see you next time, somewhere down the Yarra.